For 15 years, the Pinellas County Sheriff's Office tried to catch a killer. Oscar Tejeda Maya was the main suspect in Arturo Martinez Altamirano's murder in 2007, but it took a long time before they could arrest him. On October 29, 2007, hunters found Arturo's body along West Grove Road. They told the PCSO right away, and the investigators started looking into the 37-year-old man's murder. There wasn't a clear reason for the crime. There was DNA evidence and the name of a possible suspect, Oscar Tejeda Martinez. Witnesses said they saw Arturo and Oscar together before the murder. Even though the police knew who they were looking for, Mejia got away and left the country before they could catch him. Over the years, the case went cold. Then in 2017, the homicide department reopened it when they found out Mejia was living in Mexico. The next year, they got a DNA sample from someone who was said to be close to the suspect. Through testing, detectives were able to positively match and link Mejia to the murder of Arturo. Working together, U.S. Marshals and Interpol located and arrested Mejia on January 12, 2022. Mejia, who was 59 years old at the time of his arrest, was a Mexican citizen. He was extradited to the U.S. and faces a first-degree murder charge. Canal County Sheriff Mark Lamb said, "It was their duty to make sure violent criminals were not permitted to live freely while their victims' families suffered. We are hopeful this will bring some peace to those who have waited so long for closure," he said. For 17 years, the mystery of Pradna Epps' murder baffled authorities until DNA evidence linked a popular schoolteacher to the crime. The 21-year-old mother of two was found strangled to death in an empty carport in Gardena, California. Her body was discovered by a resident of the apartment complex as they were backing out of the parking lot. She had just moved back from San Diego the day before on April 25, 2005. Epps was alleged to have been a sex worker and was initially believed to be the victim of a serial killer. There was a fingerprint found on a purse belonging to Pratina, along with some DNA evidence, yet neither yielded a match in police databases. Despite following up on tips and an extensive investigation into the murder, all leads were exhausted. That is, until the DNA evidence found at the crime scene was retested after Epps' case was reopened in 2021, revealing a completely new suspect. On January 27, 2022, police arrested Charles Wright, a 57-year-old math and history teacher at Monroe Middle School. His bail was set at $1 million. Following the arrest of County Administrator and head of Englewood Unified School District, Erica F. Torres announced to parents and staff that he would no longer be teaching at any of their schools. Wright resigned from teaching after 20 years in order to focus on fighting the case. He remained adamant about his innocence, claiming the fingerprint evidence that linked him to the murder was probably due to his sideline business of selling clothing and purses from his car. Wright told investigators that if they asked anyone, they would tell them he was known to sell items from his car during the time of Epps. A student who wanted to remain anonymous said, "They didn't believe the charges against him were real." Mr. Wright is one of those teachers that keep it real with you and looks out for students, always encouraging us to take life and our studies seriously, said the student. However, shortly after posting bail, his DNA was linked to yet another sexual assault case in 2006, a year after Epps' murder. The victim was an 18-year-old woman known to be a sex worker in the Los Angeles area. He appeared in court on the first-degree murder charge with regard to the Epps. He pleaded not guilty to the charges leveled against him in that case. Wright, though, was arrested once again, this time being charged with both cases, and his bail was revoked. Epps' mother, who has not been named, said she hoped that this time they found the right person. Investigators strongly believe that Wright may be responsible for other incidents and urge victims to come forward with more information. In the description box, it was a murder that shocked and shattered the innocence of Bedford, Massachusetts. When Raymond Shubin returned home from work on June 10, 1971, his perfectly ordered life was torn apart. In the basement, he discovered the beaten and bloodied body of his wife, Natalie. Raymond immediately called police, and investigations began in earnest. A 54-year-old mother of two grown children was found bludgeoned and stabbed to death. Her ankles were bound, a gag hanging around her neck, and her body lay face down in the basement of her Pine Hill Road home. Police initially looked at her husband Raymond, who was the president of Lexington Trust Bank. He was cleared as a suspect after providing a solid alibi. An autopsy revealed she had been stabbed fatally and beaten over the head with an unknown blunt object. At the crime scene, police recovered blood from a bathroom sink and lifted a partial fingerprint. Apart from Natalie's 1969 Chevy Impala, nothing of importance had been stolen. Only a paring knife and pry bar, which was likely used to beat Natalie, were missing from the home. The master bathroom was disturbed by the killer, and several purses were rifled through, possibly in search of items of value. The car was later discovered in the parking lot of Bedford Veterans Administration Hospital. However, the interior had been wiped clean, leaving no evidence apart from a partial fingerprint. The violent death of the well-known and respected Natalie Shublin sent shockwaves through the small community. One resident, Maureen Sullivan, remembered being a carefree 14-year-old at the time. Places they used to play all year round were suddenly off limits. The investigation was long and drawn out, with police searching the woods behind the home. Hundreds of surveys were distributed among the community, with people being asked if they had seen anything unusual that afternoon. Recently released prisoners from the local jail and patients and staff from the local VA hospital were checked and cleared. This included 4 patients who escaped the hospital. All leads were exhausted by the end of the investigation, as none of them panned out. For years, the case went cold as police were unable to identify a suspect. Technological advancements would take years before finally delivering investigators a name. Automated fingerprint identification was used by state police to run the fingerprint lifted from the crime scene. In 1999, the police finally had a name: Arthur Louis Massai. He was someone the police wanted to look into regarding the case. Massai, though, proved a cunning foe. When investigators initially interviewed him, he denied knowing Natalie or anything about her murder. Eventually, he told investigators he'd been asked by an organized crime associate to murder the wife of a banker and make it look like a break-in, Massai claimed. He turned down the offer. Police could not find any evidence to corroborate Massai's claims. Furthermore, they found no link between Massai and Raymond Shubin involving a plot to have Natalie murdered. During a 2005 follow-up interview with police, Massai shifted the blame onto one of his cousins. He alleged that he'd learned his cousin had carried out the murder. Speaking to police, Massai provided a detailed outline of how the murder had happened. Far from clearing his name, this revelation to more police scrutiny of Massai's story. Yet it was not enough to secure an arrest. The case again went cold and would stay cold for the next 20 years. Meanwhile, Raymond Shubler passed away, aged 92 in 2012, never knowing the truth behind his wife's murder. It was looking as though their children, Kenneth and Carol, too, may also go to their graves without answers. That's when Middlesex District Attorney Marion Ryan and the Cold Case Unit refocused their efforts in the Shublin case. Approaching the case from a new angle provided some much-needed clarification, proved to be the pivotal point in turning the case in their favor. Investigators identified a woman who has not been named that admitted to being involved with Massai in schemes to defraud banks during the 1990s. She also revealed his weapon of choice. Massai habitually carried a knife and even bragged about killing someone with one. Further digging into his past revealed a lengthy criminal history. Massai had prior convictions for armed robbery, financial crimes, and assault and battery. For the prosecution team, this was enough to take to a grand jury. It was the link and corroboration they needed to back up the facts they already had. During the arraignment, Prosecutor David Soleil argued that Massai showed a disdain and general disregard for the law and the justice system. They addressed Massai's long criminal history. These include prison sentences, assaults on correctional officers, and 2 prison escapes. As recently as 2016, Massai violated a court order for harassment and abuse. Soleil told the court that Massai would not abide by the court's orders and should therefore be held without bail. After half a century, a grand jury finally indicted Massai on the first-degree murder charge. He was 76 years old and living in Salem, Massachusetts at the time of his arrest on March 22, 2022. Massai's estranged daughter, Candace Moran, spoke out about her father's arrest. She had been born just weeks before the murder. According to Moran, she had not spoken to Masai since 1991. If it's true, it's absolutely disgusting, she said. She felt absolutely sorry for the family of Natalie and said it was shocking to hear that her father had committed such a brutal crime just 2 weeks before she was born. Natalie's children, who are now in their 70s, watched the arraignment remotely. He pleaded not guilty and is being held without bail. Bedford Police Chief Ken Fung hopes that the arrest provided some closure and a sense of justice for Natalie's family. I'm hopeful that the arrest in this case today will provide some closure and sense of justice for Natalie Shublin's family. For 30 years, Noka Irvin was haunted by the memory of discovering her sister Helen's body at a YMCA room in Niles, Illinois. 35-year-old Helen Cardwell had been living at the YMCA after suffering a stroke a year earlier. She had moved from West Virginia to seek treatment and help. She was undergoing rehabilitation and was about to start her life anew when it was tragically snatched from her. It was November 7th, 1992. Helen was preparing to start a job at the Lutheran General Hospital in Park Ridge, sterilizing medical equipment. When Noka stopped by at the Leaning Tower YMCA to pay Helen a visit, she didn't expect the horror that was about to greet her. Helen was naked apart from a pair of white socks. She had been tied up and strangled with a sweater that was still around her mouth. It appeared she was sexually assaulted before being strangled to death. There was no sign of forced entry and nothing was stolen. Residents didn't notice anything unusual or suspicious the night before. There seemed to be no evidence of a visible struggle in the room. Niles police followed up on all clues and interviewed everyone in the YMCA building. What little evidence there was collected and bagged until further testing could be done to find Helen's killer. Helen Cardwell was struck down in the prime of her life before she could embark on a journey to start afresh with a new job. Her killer, it seemed, had got away with murder. For 3 decades, the case grew progressively cold. It was long enough for police to decide that Helen's family needed justice for her untimely death. In 2020, Niles Police Department reopened the investigation, and the cold case team took another look at the evidence collected. Technology had improved significantly since 1992, and the biological evidence found on Helen's body and the sweater were submitted to the National Database, CODES. In November 2021, there was a hit. It belonged to 72-year-old Richard Sisto. Sisto had no connection to Helen apart from the fact that he worked just blocks away from the Leaning Tower in Village Crossing. Police were further baffled as to how Sisto went undetected while attacking Helen at her YMCA room. Sisto, though, was no stranger to crime. Until 1992, he was incarcerated in Texas for a 1977 aggravated sexual assault case. He was accused of sexually assaulting a female prison guard in 1984. He was released on parole in April 1992 and was working at the Tow Avenue Jewel Osco store during the time when he attacked and murdered Helen Cardwell. When police made the link to Helen's murder through DNA evidence testing, police initially could not find Sisto. He was being held in Harris County, Texas on a parole violation when they finally tracked him down. He was interviewed and a DNA sample was taken, proved to be a positive match. Sisto was extradited to Illinois to face murder charges in relation to the slaying of Helen Cardwell. He was held on a $1 million bond before being extradited back to Illinois. On November 23, 2021, Sisto was ordered by Judge Anthony Calabrese to be held without bond during his hearing at the Cook County Courthouse. Detective Mike Boba of the Niles Police Department said, "The arrest comes with a great sense of relief as her sister's killer was finally caught. I'm so grateful they decided to reopen this case, and I just appreciate everyone's efforts in solving her murder," she said. At the time of his arrest, Sisto had been diagnosed with a heart condition. He ultimately passed away on January 26, 2022, while awaiting trial. Within half an hour of saying goodbye to his wife, Terry Wood's life changed forever when he discovered her body lying in a pool of her own blood in their kitchen. 31-year-old Roxanne Lee Wood and her husband, Terry, lived together for 2.5 years on Tam O'Shandalane in Niles, Michigan. They did not have any children, but were making plans to start a family together. Roxanne worked in the customer service department at Automatic Molded Plastics in South Bend, Indiana. She was affectionately known as Rock to those closest to her. She adored tending to her rose bushes. Family and friends described her as outgoing and said she loved to laugh. On the night of February 19th, 1987, Roxanne and Terry went out to the White's Bowling Lanes on 11th Street in Niles. She left the place at around 12:30 a.m., driving home alone. She and Terry had taken separate cars, and he left a little later. At 1 a.m., when Terry eventually arrived at their home, he discovered Roxanne covered in blood, throat slit. There were no signs of forced entry, save for the rear door that was left slightly ajar, an empty knife sheath laying next to her body. When police arrived and investigations began, it was deduced that Roxanne had been sexually assaulted and stabbed to death. A post-mortem revealed her throat had been slit after her death. Divers searched the nearby Brandywine Creek following Roxanne's murder, looking for the weapon. Nothing was found. The murder weapon was never recovered. But police believe that a fillet knife from the couple's own kitchen was used to kill Roxanne. Local newspaper, the South Bend Tribune, reported that Roxanne had been struck on the head with a frying pan found nearby. She was hit with such force that the handle had broken off the pan. Police first had to interview the spouse, Terry. In incidents such as this, the spouse is always considered a person of interest. DNA evidence collected from the scene included 2 vials of dried blood. In April of the same year, Terry would put up a reward for $15,000 to anyone who could provide information in identifying the killer. Unfortunately, this did not garner any fruitful leads, and the case grew colder as the years passed. Terry remained the state's prime suspect despite his claim of innocence. These suspicions were fueled by the hiring of an attorney who advised Terry to exercise his right to remain silent in regard to Roxanne's case. Terry would live under a cloud of suspicion as there were no other leads in the case for nearly 14 years. In 2001, DNA taken from the scene was tested against samples given by Terry. The DNA found at the scene was not a match, and this left investigators with more questions than answers. Terry being cleared was both a relief and a new set of problems. Now it meant starting the investigation process from scratch. They began by interviewing over 200 people, but they were no closer to finding the killer in 2001 than they were in 1987. The DNA sample was entered into Cody's, but still no match was found. The case remained cold until criminal justice students from the Western Michigan University, under the guidance of Dr. Ashley Kirsten, identifinders, and the Michigan State Police teamed up to find the killer. Students Ashley Shebeck and Carl Huber put in over 1,200 hours of their time in scanning and digitizing multiple boxes of evidence. The cold case program was spearheaded by Dr. Kirsten, and Roxanne's case was the first to be investigated by her team of students. The documents were made easily accessible and allowed detectives to browse through files and develop profiles using specific names, dates, and keywords. Using character recognition software, data was compiled to create profiles of potential persons of interest based on personal traits and characteristics. Armed with a character profile, detectives now needed a DNA profile. Identifinders tested the 2 dried blood samples to narrow down a genetic profile of the possible killer. They decided to try using genetic genealogy, a more modern and advanced method of testing DNA using genetic profiles from relatives of possible suspects. It was Gabriela Vargas, an investigative genetic genealogist who had been working as a consultant with Identifinders International, who ended up cracking the case. Literally, a case that took them 34 years to investigate took me 4 days to solve, she said proudly. It was a landmark discovery for DNA testing, as the decades-old sample was considered very low level and highly degraded. Toward the major strides made in technology in helping identify a killer that would have gotten away with the crime. Prior to Vargas handling the testing, 2 other genealogy agencies gave up on the case, calling it unsolvable. She started the process of DNA matching using family trees. Once she found the right family, it was the process of eliminating possible suspects. They found 3 possible matches. All 3 were brothers, and one of them was the man they were looking for, Patrick Wayne Gillum. Of the 3 brothers, Patrick was the only one who had a criminal history and lived near Roxanne at the time she was murdered. Detectives knew that Gillum was a smoker, and after some undercover work, were able to recover a cigarette, but and test for DNA match. The match was positive and police prepared to make the arrest. Mere days before the 35th anniversary of Roxanne's death, police arrested Gillum, now 67 years old, on February 17, 2022 at his South Bend home in Indiana. Initially, details of his identity were not released to the public, as investigators waited for him to be arraigned on the charges. Authorities did reveal, however, that the killer had no connection to Roxanne. At a press conference held on February 18, 2022, Berrien County Prosecutor Steve Pierre Engley announced the identity of Roxanne, Leawood's killer, as Patrick Wayne Gillum. Gillum was previously charged and arrested in Gary, Indiana, for breaking into a home and attacking Maureen Farag. She ultimately survived the attack, and Gillum was sentenced to 14 years in prison. He only served 7 years, half his original sentence, before brutally killing Roxanne just 6 months after his release. He lived just 4 miles away from Roxanne when the murder was committed. Maureen's husband, Robert Farag, supported the Woods family at Gillum's sentencing in April 2022. "I just hope he doesn't see the light of day. He doesn't deserve it," said Farag. For Roxanne's family, they were relieved to finally get some answers to the questions that had plagued them for 35 years. They characterized him as a predator whose actions have haunted their family for decades. Brad Wood, Roxanne's brother, never gave up on finding justice for his sister. During Gillum's sentencing, Roxanne's family were given a chance to speak, which said his voice would be heard if Gillum was ever released early for murdering Roxanne. "He is a monster and should never be allowed to walk the streets where my wife, my daughters, and my granddaughters walk free," he said. Roxanne's younger sister, Janet Wood, said that Gillum's action gave her entire family a life sentence while he got to live life as a free man for far too long. By the grace of God and the right detectives in modern technology, he was found, and we are here today to see him finally pay something for what he's done, which is likely the rest of his life in a cage, like the violent animal that he is. She said, Gillum was allowed to address the family after they had their say in court. He expressed remorse for his actions and the devastation he caused for both the family of the victim and his own. "I'm very sorry. Can't believe I did what I did. I pray for them every night. I am so sorry. I just hope sometime in the future, with God's help, that they can forgive me. And to my family that I'm sorry I disgraced. I'm so sorry," said Gillum. In an interview with WBST-TV, Janet voiced her anger at what had happened to Roxanne. "I lost a best friend, a lifelong best friend." During his sentencing, Gillum pleaded no contest to the charge of second-degree murder and was given a minimum sentence of 23 years. He will likely spend the rest of his life in prison, as he will be 90 before he serves his minimum sentence. St. Lucy's with its gorgeous beaches, varied waterways, and rich heritage sites showcases the best of Florida's beauty. Spanning 688 square miles, St. Lucie County was known for its lovely communities where families could thrive. However, everything changed after a terrible crime shook this peaceful place. Laura's parents, Jose Luis Navarro Weiser and Judy Marie Weiser, besides Laura, had 4 other children. Jose served in the United States Armed Forces while Judy looked after their family. Laura grew up in a pleasant home in St. Lucie County, Florida. Described as spirited and outspoken, Laura was only 11 years old in 1983, attending 6th grade at Chester Moore Elementary School when tragedy struck. On Sunday, November 6, 1983, around 1:30 p.m. Laura was last seen near Midway Road and Okeechobee Road in Fort Pierce, St. Lucie County, Florida. She had spent the previous night at a friend's house and was returning home with a stack of clothes in her hands, just within sight of her family's driveway, when she was last spotted. Without anyone knowing how, the little girl vanished into thin air. Worry set in for Laura's family when she did not return home that afternoon as planned. Her parents called the friend Laura had been with, but they were informed that Laura had left hours ago. Panic-stricken, they quickly searched the area, but couldn't find her. They then went to the St. Lucie County Sheriff's Office to report her missing. Authorities did not take reports of missing adolescents seriously until they had been missing for a longer period. In their words, Adolescents who did not return home on time were often playing with their friends and had simply lost track of time. This miserable strategy from law enforcement obviously forced Laura's parents to helplessly wait for their daughter to show up at home, which she never did. A bolo sheet, however, was put out for Laura after the family insisted that she would never go anywhere on her own. Unfortunately, authorities never implemented a large-scale search in the initial phase of the investigation. Soon, a piece of information regarding Laura came to the light. A deputy from the St. Lucie County Sheriff's Office, James Howard Harrison, came forward saying that he saw the girl walking near a gas station close to her home. He had been on patrol in the same area on the day Laura went missing. That was the last time anyone saw Laura alive, ever again. On November 9th, 1983, 3 days after Laura went missing, her family received the news they feared the most. Her 90-pound lifeless body had been found in a drainage ditch of what was then called the Dun Citrus Grove near Midway Road and Shin Road, approximately 600 yards from the intersection, where she was last seen walking. Her body was taken to the medical examiner's office for an autopsy. According to the report, she had been murdered on the same day she went missing. She had been sexually assaulted and strangled to death in a disgusting act of sheer brutality. Laura's family was devastated at her demise, and they were upset at the half-hearted efforts of the local authorities. They could not wrap their heads around the fact that the police had never even bothered to start a large-scale search for Laura. At the same time, their small neighborhood was shocked at this brutal crime, but it was too late for any explanation. And people wanted nothing more than to find the murderer who chose this little girl as their prey. However, sadly for them, decades would pass before the mystery could be unraveled. There were not many clues to follow. A brief investigation ensued, and detectives did a couple of interviews, but could not gather any evidence to lead to a conviction or even apprehension. Soon, the case went cold and remained so for 4 decades. Years later, in 2020, the St. Lucie County Sheriff's Office established a dedicated cold case squad. Laura N's cold case was selected for the team to reinvestigate along with a few other cases. Detective Paul Taylor was in charge of the investigation. Although Taylor had no personal relation to the deceased girl, he took a special interest in this case. In a press conference, he later shared that he somehow did relate to the little girl's story after losing his only son to suicide. He even saw his son and Laura in a dream, which he considered an indication to keep digging through the mystery. Keeping a picture of Laura on his office desk, he promised himself to never give up on this little girl. As a part of the investigation, Taylor traced his way back in time, speaking to the witnesses, as well as the original investigators. His investigation led him to one of their own who had never been on their radar, but was a part of the original investigation. The suspect was none other than the former St. Lucie County Sheriff's Office deputy, James Howard Harrison. Yes, you heard it right. He was the last person to see Laura alive. As he dug deeper into the evidence, Detective Taylor discovered many holes in the original investigation. Not only had Harrison last seen Laura, but he was also the one who reported the discovery of Laura's body. However, he was not the one who discovered it. 2 men were working at Citrus Grove when they noticed a lifeless body of a little girl and reported it to the patrol officer in the area, Harrison. After Taylor talked to one of them, the man described the incident as deeply traumatizing. However, he could still remember the crime scene in great detail. Taylor was shocked to learn that his description did not match what was in the case file. The man further told him that Harrison asked them to immediately leave after they reported the discovery to him. This seemed strange, but what had been stranger was that no one else wanted to talk to them further after that. Taylor was the first detective who talked to him after Harrison. Harrison spent 20 minutes with Laura's corpse before the other officers joined him. For the first time, there seemed to be a suspect in the murder of Laura and Heuser, and it was someone they could have never predicted. As the connection was made, Detective Taylor began to put the pieces of the puzzle together. The question had always bothered him as to why Harrison did not give the girl a lift. In any normal situation, even back then, law enforcement officer who saw a little girl carrying a bundle of clothes would have assumed she was a runaway and would have stopped to at least talk to her or would have driven her home. Detective Taylor and his team theorized that Harrison moved the girl's body into the drainage ditch, where she was found to get rid of potential evidence before the backup arrived. It was time for authorities to look at Deputy Harrison more closely for the first time. Supposedly, he had complaints brought forward from within the sheriff's office as co-workers felt he had been inappropriate with young women while conducting his duties as a deputy. Aside from his job in law enforcement, he also worked as a preacher in the region. Even in that job, he couldn't keep his dignity intact. Several accusations had come forward that Harrison had molested young girls at his job at Bethel Baptist Church in the city of Fort Pierce. Detective Taylor uncovered proof of Harrison tampering with evidence, moving things at the crime scene, and hindering the investigation. Despite this checkered past, he was never charged. He was just kicked out of the church, and he himself resigned from the St. Lucie County Sheriff's Office in 1984, just 5 months after Laura's homicide. As nobody kept any tabs on him and he was never formally charged, he just picked up his family and left, like nothing had ever happened. Over the years, he moved around a lot and worked with 10 different law enforcement agencies in his entire career. Every time he started over, he took advantage of his position and maintained access to the potential victims. Sheriff Ken J. Mascara, who used to work with Harrison, said that he voiced concerns about Harrison's inappropriate interactions with young people. These complaints did not go anywhere at the time. He made them. Around 1979 or 1980. With all this new information, Detective Taylor went forward to gather more conclusive evidence. In 2021, analysts at a private DNA lab were able to recover the DNA from the sexual assault of the victim, which suggested that the suspect was male. But it was degraded too much by the time they were able to compare the DNA samples. Due to the extreme degradation, forensic analysts could not get a 100% match. Although no conclusive DNA evidence could be found, detectives decided that there was enough probable cause and circumstantial evidence to consider Harrison responsible for Laura's murder. We have established probable cause to determine that Harrison abducted, sexually assaulted, and murdered the juvenile victim, said Chief Deputy Brian Hester in a press conference in February of 2022. Unfortunately, Harrison would once again elude justice by dying from cancer in 2008. The Wazer family was in disbelief at how the layers of this cold case had unfolded. It naturally was like a disbelief, a dream, Laura's older brother, Joe Wazer, stated. After all this time, you're telling me you're able to tell us who murdered our little sister? Sadly, Laura's parents would never see this day. Her mother passed away in 2007, and her father soon followed in 2009. Laura's remaining family was grateful to Detective Taylor for cracking this case, especially since nobody expected it. Several police departments around the state are now checking their own cold cases because they believe there were other victims. Ironically, where one police officer put all his efforts into helping people, the other abused his power to commit the crime. But at least in the end, the truth won.